General Hospital spoilers tease that Kristina Davis has been hiding a dark secret, one that threatens to unravel not only her life but the fragile threads connecting several key residents of Port Charles. Months have passed since the near-fatal car accident involving Rick Lansing and Elizabeth Baldwin, a crash that sent shockwaves through the community and left many wondering what really happened. On the surface, it was ruled a mechanical failure, a tragic mishap involving the brakes on Rick's car. But behind the scenes, the truth is far more sinister, and it begins with Kristina. Kristina hadn't intended to hurt Rick or Elizabeth. Her target had always been Ava Jerome. Bitterness, unresolved resentment, and a thirst for justice in her own mind had driven Kristina to sabotage Ava's car. At least, that's what she believed she had done. The plan was simple, or so she thought: tamper with the brake lines and let Ava face the consequences. But something went terribly wrong. Kristina, in a haze of anger and misplaced focus, mistakenly damaged Rick's car instead. By the time she realized the error, it was too late. Rick and Elizabeth were lucky to survive. Their injuries were severe but not fatal. Rick spent weeks recovering, haunted by the realization that his car hadn't just malfunctioned, it had been deliberately tampered with. Elizabeth, equally shaken, tried to move on, but a gnawing suspicion lingered. The PCPD investigated, but the evidence was thin. A few scraps of torn rubber tubing, a vague forensic suggestion of brake failure, and no suspects. The case went cold. But Rick didn't let it go. Quietly, methodically, he began digging. With the help of Ava, whose own instincts told her she had been the original target, they traced the origins of the sabotage back to Kristina. It was a discovery neither of them had expected, but one that both recognized for what it was: an opportunity. Rick and Ava weren't exactly allies, but mutual benefit made strange bedfellows. They confronted Alexis Davis, Kristina's mother, with the truth, cornering her with undeniable evidence. Alexis, a woman accustomed to navigating moral gray areas, was horrified. She knew Kristina's impulsiveness, her fire. But this? Attempted murder? And of her ex-husband, Rick? The father of her other daughter, Molly? The consequences were too terrible to consider. So Alexis did what she felt she had to. She paid them off. But the money she used wasn't hers. It belonged to Ace, stashed away for safekeeping. A trust fund, a legacy, something meant for a future untouched by the current chaos. Alexis had only been the steward of that account, a silent guardian. Now she had dipped into it, compromised it, all to keep Kristina's secret buried. Meanwhile, Kristina moved through Port Charles with unnerving ease. She attended charity events, made plans for her future, smiled at friends. There was no sign of remorse. No nightmares. No visits to Rick or Elizabeth. Alexis watched this carefully, hoping desperately for some crack in Kristina's composure. Some sign that her daughter felt the weight of what she had done. But there was nothing. Just a chilling calm that made Alexis question everything. Worse still, Kristina wasn't done with Ava. In her eyes, Ava still needed to be brought down. The failed attempt had only sharpened her resolve. This time, she took a subtler approach. She enlisted Cody Bell, a charming, morally flexible man whose ability to get close to people was both an asset and a danger. Kristina offered him a deal: seduce Ava, gain her trust, and find anything that could be used to expose her crimes. Cody, always looking for the next opportunity, accepted. He inserted himself into Ava's world slowly, weaving his way into her life with practiced ease. Ava, still reeling from recent betrayals, welcomed the attention. She let her guard down, bit by bit. She didn't know that every dinner, every flirtation, every whispered conversation was being fed back to Kristina. But not everyone was blind to the manipulation. Molly Lansing Davis had noticed changes in Kristina's behavior. As assistant district attorney, Molly was trained to spot inconsistencies, lies, and motives. But it wasn't just professional intuition, it was personal. Kristina was her sister. Rick was her father. And now, she began piecing together a timeline that made her stomach turn. At first, she dismissed the thought. Kristina couldn't be responsible. She wasn't capable of something so cruel. But the puzzle pieces fit too perfectly. The night of the accident, the misplaced anger toward Ava, the sudden influx of money into Alexis's accounts, Molly began digging. Quietly. Relentlessly. What she found horrified her. It wasn't just that Kristina had caused the accident, it was everything that followed. The silence. The manipulation. The continued vendetta against Ava. And perhaps worst of all, Alexis's role in covering it all up. Molly's world shifted. Her moral compass, so firmly planted, now pointed her directly toward a painful truth: she had to confront her sister. The confrontation came on a quiet evening at Alexis's house. Molly didn't wait. She didn't soften her words. She accused Kristina, laid everything bare: the accident, the cover-up, the blackmail. Kristina's expression didn't change at first. She denied, then deflected. But Molly's anger was white-hot. "You nearly killed my father," she screamed. "And now you're spying on Ava? What is wrong with you?" Kristina snapped back, defending herself, arguing that Ava had ruined people's lives, that justice needed to be served. She didn't regret what she had done. She was trying to fix what the legal system couldn't. Molly couldn't take it. The sisters shouted, the argument escalating until it spilled out into the hallway. Alexis tried to intervene, but it was too late. Words became actions. Kristina pushed, Molly pushed back. A stumble. A cry. And then silence. Kristina lay motionless at the bottom of the stairs. Blood pooled beneath her head, the result of a hard impact against the marble floor. Alexis froze, unable to process what had just happened. Molly stood in shock, her hands trembling. This wasn't just a fight anymore. It was a tragedy. And it was just beginning. Alexis stood paralyzed for a moment, her heart thundering in her chest as her eyes locked on Kristina's unmoving body. The sound of her daughter's skull cracking against the marble still echoed in her ears. Molly was gasping for breath, hands trembling as she tried to process what had just happened. She hadn't meant for it to go that far. The argument had exploded, emotions had surged, but this was unthinkable. Alexis dropped to her knees beside Kristina, her legal mind briefly overtaken by the panic of a mother. She checked for a pulse. Faint, but present. Kristina was alive, but barely. Within moments, an ambulance was called. EMTs flooded the house, their calm efficiency slicing through the chaos. Molly stood in the background, clutching her arms around herself, watching as her sister was loaded onto a stretcher. Alexis didn't speak. Her eyes were cold, unreadable, locked in a 1,000-yard stare. But beneath the silence, gears were already turning. She was both mother and lawyer, and she knew exactly what was at stake. Too much had already been buried. Too many lines had been crossed. If the truth came out now about the accident, the blackmail, the stolen trust money, it wouldn't just destroy Kristina. It would take them all down. At the hospital, doctors worked quickly to stabilize Kristina. A traumatic brain injury. Swelling, bruising, fractured skull. The prognosis was uncertain. She could wake up in a day, a week, or never. The possibility that Kristina might not survive loomed over everything like a storm cloud. And with her unconscious, the secret remained safe for now. Back in Port Charles, Rick Lansing had no idea what had happened to Kristina. He and Ava were more focused on Alexis's next move. They had pushed her hard with the blackmail, threatening to expose Kristina unless Alexis gave them full access to the funds tied to Ace. Rick wasn't doing it for the money. Not entirely. For him, it was about control. Revenge. Kristina had nearly killed him, and he couldn't let that go unanswered. Ava, on the other hand, was far more calculating. She viewed the situation like a chessboard, and Kristina's mistake had handed her a powerful piece. Now, however, Rick noticed a shift. Alexis wasn't responding to his messages. Her silence was unusual, and it made him uneasy. He suspected something had gone wrong, But he didn't know how bad it was until he overheard a nurse at General Hospital mentioning Kristina's name. He tracked down the attending physician and confirmed it. Kristina Corinthos Davis had been admitted with a severe head injury. Rick's reaction was layered. On one hand, this wasn't what he had wanted. He wanted justice, leverage, not a comatose young woman. On the other, the timing couldn't have been more dangerous. If Kristina died without ever confessing, all evidence of her crime would vanish. Rick's leverage would dissolve. And so would the grip he held on Alexis. Ava, however, was already seeing the opening. Cody Bell had been growing closer to her, seducing her with precision and subtlety. She had enjoyed the flirtation, even considered him useful. But now, with Kristina incapacitated, Ava grew suspicious. Cody had always shown up in the right places, said the right things. It was too clean. Too rehearsed. And Ava Jerome didn't believe in coincidences. She began quietly testing him, planting false bits of information and watching to see where it ended up. Within days, one of those lies came back to her through Rick. It confirmed everything. Cody wasn't just a flirtation, he was a mole. And someone had paid him to get close. Ava's mind went straight to Kristina. Even unconscious, Kristina's games continued to haunt her. She confronted Cody directly, luring him to her gallery under the pretense of a private evening. Once there, she turned cold. Asked pointed questions. Pressed him until his lies began to unravel. Cody, sensing the trap, tried to charm his way out, but Ava was done playing. She threatened him with exposure, with charges of conspiracy, blackmail, and stalking. Cody, desperate, cracked. He admitted everything. Kristina had hired him to seduce Ava, to uncover something that could bring her down. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Kristina's plot had backfired, and now Ava had all the ammunition she needed to take control of the entire situation. Meanwhile, Molly was unraveling. Guilt consumed her. She replayed the fight over and over again in her head, trying to justify her anger, her words, her actions. But no matter how she framed it, the image of Kristina falling, of her body hitting the marble, was burned into her memory. And now, with Kristina unconscious, Molly was the only person alive who truly knew what had happened in that hallway. Alexis had erased the security footage, wiped the phones, scrubbed the scene clean. It was a deliberate, surgical cover-up. And that terrified Molly. Because Alexis wasn't doing it to protect Molly. She was doing it to protect the whole family. To keep the secret. To maintain the illusion that they were still intact. But they weren't. The family had been shattered, and Alexis was gripping the fragments with bloody hands, trying to piece them back together with lies. Rick, growing impatient, turned up the pressure. He demanded more from Alexis: money, power, leverage. He wanted her to secure a position for him, something in the DA's office or city administration. If she didn't comply, he would leak what he knew about Kristina to the press. Ava, watching from the sidelines, allowed it to unfold. Let Rick play the aggressor, while she quietly assembled her own counterattack. Because Ava now had Cody's confession. And with it, she held something far more powerful than a blackmail threat. She had a documented conspiracy, orchestrated by a member of the Corinthos family, with legal and criminal implications that could tear the family apart. She could destroy Alexis. Destroy Rick. Destroy Cody. And if Kristina ever woke up, she could finish the job. But Ava didn't strike immediately. She waited. She let the silence fester, watched the cracks widen. And in the hospital room, Kristina stirred. It began slowly. A twitch in her hand. A movement of her eyelids. Days passed, then a week. And then, one afternoon, Kristina opened her eyes. Disoriented, weak, but alive. Alexis was by her side instantly, brushing hair from her face, tears slipping down her cheeks. Relief poured through her, followed by dread. Because now, everything would start again. Kristina's memory was foggy at first. She didn't recall the fall, didn't recall the fight. But that wouldn't last. It never did. And when her memory returned, so would the danger. Molly didn't know what to feel. Seeing Kristina awake was a shock. She visited her once, standing quietly at the edge of the hospital bed, guilt clawing at her insides. Kristina looked so fragile, so breakable. And for the first time since it happened, Molly realized just how close she had come to killing her sister. Kristina's recovery would be slow. Physically, she would heal. But mentally? The damage ran deeper. She would remember eventually. And when she did, the fragile alliances holding everything together, Alexis's cover-up, Rick's blackmail, Ava's secrets, Cody's betrayal, would explode. One truth would unravel another. Kristina would not stay silent forever. And neither would Molly. The real war in Port Charles was only just beginning.